my wife told me. "You'll be sleeping on the couch until you say sorry." I answered, "All right," and never actually apologized. After 3 weeks, I converted the spare room into my own personal space. When she finally came in, my wife stood in the doorway that night, arms crossed, eyes cold, and said the sentence that was supposed to punish me: "You'll be sleeping on the couch until you say sorry." The living room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint glow of the TV she had left on behind her. I remember looking at the couch, then back at her. "All right," I said calmly. I never actually apologized. The first week, I slept on that couch like it was a temporary exile. She walked past me every morning without a word, clearly waiting for me to break, waiting for me to beg. But I didn't. By the second week, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for the argument to end and started noticing things. Instead, the way she spent hours whispering on her phone in the bedroom, the way she smiled at messages she wouldn't show me. By the third week, I quietly turned the spare room into my own personal space. And when she finally opened that door and stepped inside, the look on her face told me she had just realized something. This punishment had stopped working. I'm not the kind of man who yells during arguments. That had always been my role in our marriage. The quiet one, the reasonable one. The one who let things cool down instead of making them explode. For years, I thought that made me the stronger partner. Now I realize it mostly made me predictable. My wife, Lena, had learned that pattern early. Whenever we fought, she would push harder, raise her voice higher, escalate the situation until I eventually backed down just to end the tension. Most of the time, the apology came from me, even when I wasn't entirely sure what I'd done wrong. Peace always seemed cheaper than pride. Over time, those little victories built something inside her. A quiet certainty that if she held the line long enough, I would fold. Friends joked about it sometimes. "Man, you're whipped," one of them laughed once at a barbecue. I smiled and shrugged it off. What none of them knew was that I paid most of the bills, handled every repair, every appointment, every silent responsibility that kept the house running. I never kept score because I believed marriages weren't supposed to work that way. But sleeping on that couch night after night gave me something I hadn't had in years, time to think. And once I started thinking, I began noticing things I had ignored for far too long. The strange thing about sleeping on the couch wasn't the discomfort, it was the silence. When you're suddenly removed from your own bedroom, you start seeing the house from a different angle. Late at night, the hallway light would slip under the bedroom door, and I'd hear Lena talking softly on the phone. Not arguing, laughing. The kind of quiet, relaxed laugh she hadn't shared with me in months. During the day, the small things started standing out. When I walked into the kitchen, she would tilt her phone screen away just slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a quick, practiced motion. If I asked what she was watching, she'd answer vaguely, "Just stuff." At dinner, she spoke to me like a distant roommate. "Did you pay the electricity bill? Don't forget the trash tomorrow." No warmth, no curiosity, just instructions. One evening, I passed by the bedroom door while she was on speaker with a friend. She didn't notice me in the hallway. Her friend asked, "So, are you guys okay?" Lena gave a small laugh. "Oh, please. He'll apologize eventually. He always does." There was no anger in her voice, just certainty. That was the moment I realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't just an argument to her. It was a waiting game she believed she had already won. The turning point didn't come during a fight. It came on a quiet Tuesday night. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, half watching some late-night show while checking our bank account. It was something I did out of habit, making sure the bills were lined up, the mortgage payments scheduled, the usual routine that had quietly been my responsibility for years. That's when I noticed something strange. 3 subscription charges I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, but when I clicked into the details, I saw the email connected to the accounts. It wasn't mine. It was Lena's private email, the one she rarely used for anything related to the house. I didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen while the refrigerator hummed in the background. Then I checked a few more things. Streaming accounts I paid for had new profiles I didn't recognize. Ride receipts appeared late at night in parts of the city. She'd never mentioned visiting. Small things, individually meaningless. Together, they formed a picture. That was the moment something inside me finally settled. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished waiting. If she believed I would eventually crawl back with an apology, then she clearly didn't understand something important. I had already started building a life in the next room. Once the anger faded, what replaced it was clarity. I stopped thinking about the argument and started thinking about structure, how our lives were actually arranged. Who paid what? Who owned what? Who depended on what? For years, I had handled most of the practical side of our marriage. The mortgage came from my account. Utilities were set to my card. The insurance policies, the subscriptions, even the maintenance contracts were all under my name. Not because I wanted control, because it had always been easier that way. So I began organizing things quietly. At night, while she stayed in the bedroom, I sat at the small desk I had moved into the spare room and reviewed everything. I updated passwords, separated a few shared services, moved automatic payments back to accounts that only I managed. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just boundaries. I also rearranged the spare room properly. A bed, a small bookshelf, a work desk, a lock on the door. It slowly stopped feeling like a temporary escape and started feeling like a deliberate space. Meanwhile, I stayed polite. No accusations, no confrontations. I still took out the trash, still greeted her in the mornings, still acted like a man waiting for the tension to pass. Because the most powerful move in a conflict isn't the loudest one. It's the one the other person never sees coming. The fourth week arrived quietly. By then, the spare room no longer looked like a temporary setup. The bed was properly made, a small lamp glowed beside the desk, and the shelves held the books and files I actually used. It felt calm, ordered, mine. Lena hadn't bothered to check the room until that evening. I heard the door creak open from the hallway while I was sitting at the desk. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes moving across the room like she had walked into someone else's apartment. "You redecorated," she said. Her voice carried a strange mix of surprise and irritation. "Just organize things," I replied. She looked at the bed, then the desk, then the small lock installed on the inside of the door. The silence stretched between us. Then she asked the question she clearly hadn't expected to need. "So, when are you coming back to the bedroom?" I leaned back in the chair and met her eyes calmly. "I'm not." The words hung in the air. At that exact moment, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter outside. A notification sound echoed faintly down the hallway, followed by another, then another. Subscriptions, services, and shared accounts she'd quietly used for years had all just expired. And for the first time since this started, she looked genuinely uncertain. The silence that followed was different from the quiet we'd lived in for weeks. This one had weight. Lena stood in the doorway of the spare room, processing what I'd said. For a moment, she looked like she expected me to laugh and admit it was a joke. When I didn't, the confidence she usually carried started slipping. "What do you mean you're not?" she asked. "I mean exactly that," I said. She didn't yell, not at first. Instead, she walked back into the kitchen, where her phone was lighting up with notifications. I could hear her tapping the screen, opening apps, refreshing pages. Then came the confusion. Why isn't this working? A few minutes later, frustration replaced it. By the next morning, the tone had changed completely. She was suddenly trying to talk, really talk, for the first time in weeks, asking why things were getting so serious, as if the silence had only just started. Friends eventually noticed the shift too. When one of them joked about me apologizing like usual, I simply shrugged. "I already moved on," I said, and that was the real consequence. Not the cancelled subscriptions or the locked door. It was the realization that the version of me who used to fold just to keep the peace was gone. For a long time, I believed peace in a marriage meant avoiding conflict at any cost. If that meant apologizing first, I did it. If that meant letting small things slide, I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I thought patience and silence were signs of strength. But sleeping on that couch taught me something different. Silence can also be a mirror, night after night. Lying there in the dim light of the living room, I had time to look at our life without distractions. I started seeing the patterns, the way my effort had slowly become invisible, the way my patience had quietly turned into permission. Moving into the spare room wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. Over the next few weeks, Lena tried different approaches. Some conversations were calm, some weren't. But the dynamic between us had already shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. For the first time in years, I wasn't negotiating for peace. I was deciding what I was willing to live with. Maybe our marriage would rebuild itself with new rules. Maybe it wouldn't. But one thing was certain. The man who once slept on the couch waiting to apologize had finally learned how to stand up and walk away.